If I were to ask you what really happened at the cross, what would you say? Most Christians would probably say, well, Jesus died for my sins. Jesus paid for my sins. Jesus took my place or something like that. Well, that is the subject of the atonement, the doctrine of the atonement, what actually happened at the cross. And believe it or not, there's a lot of different answers for that. And the answers I just gave you are ones that you might have, but some people actually take a lot of opposition to that, and they don't think that actually happened in that way, or they might just use those kind of generically and might not really believe it. So I want to take a while here, several videos, and just talk about theories of the atonement. What actually did Jesus do at the cross? So thank you for joining with me. Today we're going to just start with some background here about this idea of atonement. What does atonement mean anyway? Because if you look through your Bible, you might see it show up, this word show up some in the Old Testament, but probably not even in the New Testament. And so we're going to talk about this. What exactly does it mean? So the ultimate purpose is to find out, what did Jesus actually do on the cross? And we're going to look, as we go through some of these videos, at different theories of the atonement, exactly what happened. But just to kind of give away what I think is true, I believe in what's called penal substitutionary atonement. And that's the idea that Jesus took the penalty that we were supposed to make, and he took that on himself on the cross as our substitute, so we do not have to experience the ultimate punishment for sin, which is eternal death. He did it in our place. Penal is a penalty. Substitution is that he did it in our place. But there's so many other theories of the atonement also that are out there, and we're going to look at them down the line here because I think the hub of it all is penal substitutionary atonement, but there are other things that actually are the results of penal substitutionary atonement. We're going to talk about them. So just first today, what in the world does this word atonement mean? Now, the word atonement is pretty interesting because most of our theological terms come from other languages. So we can sound really smart, right? When we say them, they come from Greek or Latin or Hebrew or something. The word atonement is actually an English word, and it seems oversimplified, but it really just means at-one-ment. So I'm going to show you a few slides here. This is all it means. Now, this is kind of surprising because we think surely there's some deep meaning here, but it just simply means at-one-ment. This word actually only shows up in English as late as the 16th century, so it's not even really that old of a word, and just simply describes two parties becoming at one, two parties that were not reconciled now being reconciled. And that is what happened at the cross. And actually, it's even what happened through the Old Testament as we see all of the sacrifices and everything that happened back then. So we're going to just begin today looking at some things in the Old Testament, this word atonement or this idea of atonement, how was it actually used? And then in the next video, I want to talk about the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat. I don't want to put them all together in one video because I don't want you to get tired of watching and not watch it, because that one is, I think, the most important one of this whole study. So we are going to begin right here with this Hebrew word, kafar. Kafar, this is a verb in Hebrew, and it appears 102 times in the Old Testament, and is translated as make an atonement or make atonement. So it appears all through the Old Testament. Literally, this word means to cover with bitumen. Bitumen is like a tar that you used to cover something to seal it, when Noah built the ark. He was supposed to, as the King James says, pitch it within and without with pitch, or cover it with bitumen, and it would seal this thing and it would cover it. So there's the idea of a covering. And when we talk about the atonement of the sacrifices in the Old Testament, the idea, of course, is that it was like a covering for our sin. And in the next video, hopefully that will be very, very clear. So make sure you watch for that video if I haven't already posted by the time that you see this one. So this word kafar, this Hebrew word, has the meaning of it is to cover with bitumen, or like this pitch or this tar. But it also carries a figurative meaning of appeasing or placating or disannulling something. One of the places that this is used in the Bible is when Jacob and Esau had their spat. Remember, Jacob left and he went away and he worked for his two wives for 14 years, and he stayed with his father-in-law Laban for a while. Then he came back and he was going to meet with Isaac, the one that he had taken his birthright from. And so he's kind of scared to meet him. And so he starts to send these gifts ahead. And the reason he did that was to appease his brother. And that's the same word here, kafar. He's trying to appease his brother. He's trying to help them not to be separate anymore, to be able to become at one and be reconciled together. So basically, so Esau doesn't kill him. This word is also used in Proverbs 16:14, where it says, as messengers of death is the king's wrath, but a wise man will appease it. A wise man will appease it. So it's the idea of appeasing. As the sacrifices in the tabernacle and the temple in the Old Testament were made, it was a way of appeasing God. So he didn't just come and destroy all the people all at one time. They were being made at one. For at least temporarily, God could be reconciled with his people and allow them to live. I want to look at this one specific situation right now. This is in Numbers chapter 25. Let me get a Bible up here for you. Numbers chapter 25 and verse 3. This is a situation where Moses is having to deal with some sexual immorality in Israel with the Moabites, and they were also worshiping the Moabite gods, and God was angry about this. So in verse 3, he says, so Israel was joined to Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel. And so the Israelites, they're cohabitating with the women of Moab, and they're taking their gods. And God he's sick of it. He's just not going to have this anymore. And so what happens here in the verses is one man right in front of everybody, when Moses is discussing this with them, he brings this Moabite woman into his tent. And God says, okay, that's enough. And it starts this plague, and people start to be destroyed. But a guy steps in, and we're going to just skip down to verse 7. Now, when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose from among the congregation and took a javelin in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her body. So the plague was stopped among the children of Israel, and those who died in the plague were 24,000. And then God says, okay, this is great. We say, well, that's gory. That's nasty. Well, what Phinehas was doing was he was saving people from dying, because God was killing people because of this rampant sin that was there. Look in verse 10, how God condones what he did. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the children of Israel, because he was zealous with my zeal among them, so that I did not consume the children of Israel in my zeal. I'll skip it up a little bit here. And I just lost my place. Let's see. Okay, up here. So I did not consume in my zeal. Verse 12 right here. Therefore say, behold, I give to him my covenant of peace, and it shall be to him and his descendants after him a covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and made atonement for the children of Israel. That is the word kafar. He stood in the gap and he brought God and his people back together so God would stop destroying these people because of their sin. I think that's a pretty good picture of atonement in the Old Testament, what kafar means. There's another word that's used in the Old Testament, and this one might actually be more familiar to you, because it is the word Kippur. It's the word Kippur. Now, you probably know this one from Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. It was a day every year when Israel would come and they would do special sacrifices before God. And basically what it would do is it would give the possibility where God wouldn't destroy his people for another year. The priests were to offer sacrifices for himself and then for the people. And they would just do some really cool things on that day, which some of it will go into our next video. But this word Kippur, it appears 8 times in the Old Testament, and the meaning of it is expiation. Now, expiation is a removal of something. When something is removed, like when we talk about sins being expiated, they are removed, they are gone, they are completely cleaned out. Every time, this is interesting, every time this word appears in the Old Testament, it appears as Hakippurim, as you see in the bottom of on the slide there, Hakippurim, which if you know anything about Hebrew, you know that, obviously I have this written kind of English in an English transliteration, so it's left to right, but in Hebrew, they read right to left. And at the beginning of the word, they will put the definite article, like the, but it's added to, and that's the ha at the beginning. Ha means the, and then the I-am at the end is how they make it plural, like the word cherubim is plural for cherub. Seraphim is plural for seraph. So the word Purim is plural for Kippur, or Kippurim is plural for Kippur, if that makes any sense. So technically how this really, I guess, should be translated, every time it shows up as HaKippurim, it should be translated as the day, or as the atonements, the atonements. So for whatever it's worth, there you go. That's interesting. But it shows up in our Bible as atonement. And Yom Kippur, the word Yom means day. Yom Kippur is the day of atonement. And this is captivating because when you see this in the Old Testament, you see a great picture of God being reconciled and becoming at one with his people again. Let's actually go to Exodus chapter 30. Let me get up here for you. Exodus chapter 30 and verse 9. Exodus chapter 30 and verse 9. He's talking here about the altar, and he says, "You shall not offer strange incense on it, nor burnt offering, nor grain offering, nor shall you pour a drink offering on it. And Aaron shall make atonement upon its horns once a year with the blood of the sin offering of atonement. Once a year he shall make atonement upon it throughout your generation. It is most holy to the Lord." This is, of course, going to be the Day of Atonement. Once a year, special offerings are going to be made. Now to really look at this Day of Atonement, we're going to go to Leviticus chapter 16. I'll show it to you. You can look it up on your own if you want. Leviticus chapter 16, this whole passage is about what's supposed to happen on the Day of Atonement. I'm not going to get into all the details because there's so many things as the priest comes into the holiest place in the tabernacle. And he's supposed to go through all these ceremonial things. But two very important things he's supposed to do is, one, he's supposed to take a bull and he's supposed to kill it. The other thing he's supposed to do is take 2 goats. And on one goat, he will put his hands, and symbolically, the sins of the people of Israel will be transferred to that goat, and he'll send that goat out into the wilderness, and it's called the scapegoat. It takes the sins of the people out of the camp. But the other goat, he is supposed to kill. So let's look at this. Leviticus, that's Leviticus 16. I'm not gonna read all that to you because I just explained what was happening there. But I do want to go to Leviticus chapter 23 because he kind of repeats some of the stuff here about the Day of Atonement. Leviticus 23 and verse 26. "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Also the 10th day of this 7th month shall be the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. It shall be a holy convocation for you. You shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. You shall do no work on that same day, for it is the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, to make atonement for you before the Lord your God. For any person who is not afflicted in soul on that same day shall be cut off from his people." That's interesting because as the priest was to take the living goat, the scapegoat, he would transfer the sins of the people onto that goat, and he was sent out of the camp. This was often a punishment for sin. People were to be sent out of the camp. If they're going to live in the sin, they can't be there in the camp anymore. And so as sins were transferred to this goat, it was to be sent out of the camp, taking that punishment for the people. But the other goat then was to be killed, and its blood was to be put on the Ark of the Covenant, on the mercy seat, which is the subject of our next video. And this would allow God to, in so many ways, to allow himself not to kill his people for another year. It was the Day of Atonement. So those are the first 2 words we've discussed. We have Kafar and we have Kippur. In the next video, we are going to look at another word that is describes and talks about the atonement, and it's how we get our term, the mercy seat, from. So if I've already posted that video, go find it. I will, of course, have a link under this video. And if I haven't posted it yet, keep waiting for it because it is, I think, the primary topic of importance when it comes to what Jesus actually did on the cross. We don't really understand it until we understand the mercy seat and what happened on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So I'll see you then. God bless.